What's your real-life encounter with a cryptid or paranormal entity? I was camping alone in the Appalachian mountains. I'd set up my tent near a stream, about 2 miles from the nearest trail. It was my second night there, and I'd just finished dinner when I heard something moving through the woods. It sounded big, branches snapping, heavy footsteps. At first, I assumed it was a bear. I made noise and banged my cooking pot trying to scare it away. The footsteps stopped for a moment. Then they started again, but this time they sounded different. Rhythmic, deliberate, like something walking on 2 legs. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the sound. That's when I saw it. There was a figure standing between the trees, maybe 40 feet away. It was tall, probably 8 feet, and covered in reddish-brown hair. Its arms were incredibly long and muscular. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, watching me. I yelled at it, thinking maybe it was a person trying to scare me. It didn't react. Instead, it tilted its head to the side, like it was curious. Then it did something that still gives me chills. It mimicked me. It tilted its head the exact same way, at the exact same angle. Then it took a step closer. I've been camping my whole life. I've encountered bears, mountain lions, even aggressive moose. But I've never felt fear like that. This thing wasn't just watching me, it was studying me. I could feel its intelligence in the way it moved. Everything about it felt deliberate, purposeful. I slowly backed toward my tent, keeping the flashlight trained on it. It matched my movements. When I stepped back, it stepped forward, maintaining the same distance between us. I knew I couldn't outrun it, and I knew my tent wouldn't protect me, so I did the only thing I could think of. I made myself as big as possible, spread my arms, held my ground, and screamed at the top of my lungs. The creature stopped. It stood there for a long moment. Then it made a sound I'll never forget, a deep, whooping call that echoed through the valley. After that, it turned and walked away, not running, just casually walking, like it had decided I wasn't worth its time. I packed up my camp in the dark and hiked back to my car, using only my headlamp. I've never been back to that area. I've talked to other people who've hiked in the Appalachians, and a few of them have described similar encounters. The height, the reddish-brown fur, the intelligence, all of it matches what they believe was a Sasquatch. I don't know what it was, but I know it wasn't an animal, at least not like any animal I've ever seen. My family used to own a cabin in northern Minnesota, on a lake surrounded by dense forest. When I was about 12, we were up there for a week during the summer. One night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of something tapping on my window. At first, I thought it was a branch brushing against the glass, but the tapping was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I got out of bed and pulled back the curtain. Something was looking back at me. It had the face of an owl, but it was the size of a human. Its eyes were huge and yellow, and it was perched on the windowsill. That shouldn't have been possible. The window was on the 2nd floor. We stared at each other. Then it opened its mouth and said my name. Not an owl sound, my actual name. The voice sounded like a woman's. I screamed and fell backward. My parents came running. When they looked out the window, there was nothing there. They told me I must have had a nightmare, but I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. The next morning, we found talon marks on the windowsill. Deep gouges carved into the wood, marks that hadn't been there before. My dad couldn't explain them. He suggested maybe a large bird had landed there, but the marks were massive, far larger than anything a normal owl could make. For the rest of the week, I refused to sleep in that room. I slept on the couch downstairs instead. And every night, around 3 in the morning, I heard tapping on the upstairs windows. We sold the cabin a few years later for unrelated reasons, but I've never forgotten that face or the sound of it saying my name. Years later, I learned about Native American legends of owl women, or owl witches, entities that can transform and use people's names to lure them outside. I don't know if that's what I saw, but whatever it was, it knew who I was. I was hunting with my dad in the mountains of Montana. We'd hiked about 5 miles into the backcountry to reach a spot he'd scouted earlier in the week. We set up in a blind before dawn and waited for sunrise. Around 6:30, as the light started to come up, I saw something moving through the trees about 100 yards away. At first, I assumed it was a deer or an elk, so I got my rifle ready. But as it moved closer, I realized it wasn't any animal I recognized. It was walking upright on two legs, and it was massive, easily over 7 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair. My dad saw it too and immediately grabbed my arm. We watched as it moved through the forest. And what struck me most was how quiet it was. Something that big should have been making noise, crashing through brush, snapping branches. But it barely made a sound. It stopped in a small clearing, maybe 70 yards from our blind. I got a clear look at it through my scope. Its face was flat, almost human, with a pronounced brow ridge and a massive jaw. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, and its arms were long and muscular. It bent down and picked something up from the ground. I couldn't see what, and examined it. Then it looked directly at our blind. We both froze. It shouldn't have been able to see us. We were well camouflaged and downwind, but it was staring straight at us. After a moment, it made a sound, a deep, guttural call that I felt in my chest more than I heard, and then it turned and walked away. We stayed in that blind for another hour, not speaking, just trying to process what we'd seen. When we finally got up, we walked to the spot where the creature had been standing. In the soft ground, we found footprints. They were enormous, at least 18 inches long, and the stride length was over 6 feet. Whatever made those tracks was walking on two legs and was far larger than any human. My dad took photos of the prints, and we followed the trail for about half a mile before it disappeared into rocky terrain. We never found any more sign of it. When we got back, we reported what we'd seen to the Forest Service. The ranger told us we weren't the first people to report something like that in those mountains. He said there had been dozens of sightings over the years, tracks found, vocalizations recorded, but no one had ever captured clear footage. He suggested we'd seen a Sasquatch. I was skeptical before that day. I'm not anymore. I know what I saw. My friend and I were exploring an abandoned hospital in rural Pennsylvania. It was around 2 in the afternoon, so there was plenty of daylight, and we'd already gone through most of the building without any issues. We were on the 4th floor, checking out what used to be the psychiatric ward, when we heard something that made us both stop dead in our tracks. It was a child laughing, clear as day, coming from down the hallway. We looked at each other, and I could tell immediately that she'd heard it too. We weren't imagining it. A moment later, the laugh came again, closer this time, high-pitched, echoing off the empty walls. We called out, asking if anyone was there. The laughing stopped. We started walking toward where the sound had come from, and as we got closer, we felt it. The temperature dropped so suddenly and so dramatically that we could see our breath. It had been warm outside, maybe 70 degrees, and the hospital itself held heat. But this hallway was freezing. We reached a door that was slightly open. The cold was coming from inside. I pushed the door open. The room was in worse condition than the rest of the building. The walls were covered in scratches, deep gouges that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. In the center of the room was a small rocking chair, moving back and forth on its own. There was no breeze, no open windows, no reason for it to be moving. But it rocked steadily, like someone was sitting in it. My friend grabbed my arm and said, "We need to leave, now." I agreed. As we turned to go, we heard it again. The child's laugh, right behind us. We ran. We didn't look back. We ran down the stairs and out of that building, and we didn't stop until we reached the car. When we finally caught our breath, I looked at my friend and said, "Did you feel that?" She nodded. She said that when we were in that room, it felt like something was watching us, something angry. When we got home, we looked up the history of the hospital. We found out that in the 1950s, a 10-year-old girl had died in the psychiatric ward. She'd been restrained to her bed during a fire and couldn't escape. Other patients had reportedly heard her crying and laughing in the days before the fire, like she knew what was going to happen. People who've explored that hospital since have reported the same things we experienced. The cold, the laughter, the rocking chair. I've never been back. When I was 17, I was driving home late at night on a rural highway in northern Wisconsin. It was around midnight, and I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. The road was surrounded by dense forest on both sides, and my headlights were the only light for miles. I came around a curve and saw something standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on my brakes and stopped about 20 feet away from it. At first, I thought it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was something else entirely. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur, with impossibly long arms that hung down past its knees. But what made me freeze was its face. It wasn't a bear's face. It was almost human, but wrong. The proportions were off, and its eyes reflected my headlights with this eerie amber glow. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then it turned its head in this slow, deliberate way that made my skin crawl, like it had heard something. It looked into the forest. Without looking back at me, it stepped off the road and disappeared into the trees, moving with a smooth, fluid grace that something that big shouldn't have had. I sat there shaking, unable to move, for at least 5 minutes before I finally got the courage to drive past that spot. I drove 90 miles an hour the rest of the way home. I've never told many people about this because I know how crazy it sounds, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a costume. It was something else. I've researched it since then, and based on the descriptions, I think I saw a dogman. People have reported seeing them in that part of Wisconsin for decades. The humanoid shape, the wolf-like features, the amber eyes, it all matches. I still drive that highway sometimes, and every time I pass that curve, my heart starts racing. I can't help but look into the trees, half expecting to see those amber eyes staring back at me. I was hiking alone in the Pacific Northwest and had stopped to rest near a small creek. It was early evening, and I was planning to set up camp soon. I was filtering water when I heard branches snapping behind me. I turned around, expecting to see a deer, or maybe a bear. But what I saw made me drop my water bottle. There was something crouching in the bushes about 30 feet away, watching me. It was humanoid, but definitely not human. Its skin was grayish-green and leathery. Its limbs were too long, too thin. The face was the worst part. It had large, dark eyes, no nose that I could see, and a mouth that was just a slit. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then it did something that terrified me. It smiled, or at least it tried to. The slit of its mouth widened, revealing teeth, too many teeth, and it made this clicking sound. I grabbed my backpack and started backing away slowly. That's when it stood up. Seeing its full height was horrifying. It was at least 8 feet tall, impossibly thin. I turned and ran. I didn't care about my camping gear. I just ran back down the trail. As I ran, I could hear it moving through the forest alongside me, parallel to the trail. I ran for probably 2 miles before I finally reached the parking lot. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sat there shaking, staring at the tree line, expecting to see it step out of the woods. It never did. I've tried to research what I saw, but nothing matches the description exactly. Some people have suggested it might have been something like a rake or a crawler, entities people report seeing in forests across North America. I don't know what to call it. All I know is this: it wasn't human, and it was intelligent. I could see it in its eyes. It was thinking, watching, calculating. I've never gone hiking alone since. When I was in college, I lived in an old house with 3 roommates. It had been built in the 1800s, and it had a strange vibe from the day we moved in. Doors would open on their own. We'd hear footsteps upstairs when all of us were downstairs. Sometimes we'd smell pipe tobacco, even though none of us smoked. We tried to ignore it. We told ourselves that old houses make weird noises, but then things escalated. One night, I was alone in the house, studying in my room around midnight. I heard someone walk up the stairs and down the hallway toward my room. Heavy footsteps that made the floorboards creak. I called out, asking which roommate it was, but no one answered. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I could see the shadow of feet under the door, blocking the light from the hallway. I sat there frozen, staring at that shadow. Then my door handle started to turn. Slowly. I yelled, "Who is it?" The handle stopped moving. I waited for what felt like an eternity. Then I heard the footsteps walk away, back down the hall. I opened my door. The hallway was empty. All the other bedroom doors were closed. I checked the entire house. I was completely alone. When my roommates came home, I told them what had happened. That's when they admitted they'd had similar experiences. One roommate said she'd woken up to someone standing at the foot of her bed, a tall man in old-fashioned clothes, who disappeared when she turned on the light. Another roommate said he'd been pushed down the stairs by invisible hands. We decided to research the house. We found records showing that a man had died there in the 1920s. He'd fallen down the stairs and broken his neck. His wife had found him hours later. According to old newspaper articles, she'd said she heard him calling for help, but thought she was imagining it. After that, the activity got worse. Doors slamming, objects moving on their own, and always the smell of pipe tobacco. The worst incident happened to me. I was in the shower when the bathroom door locked itself. From the inside, I tried the handle, but it wouldn't turn. Then I heard breathing on the other side of the door, heavy, raspy. I started yelling for my roommates and pounding on the door. Suddenly, it unlocked. I threw it open, but no one was there. We moved out at the end of that semester. None of us wanted to stay in that house any longer. I've looked it up since then. It's been rented to different people over the years, and from what I've found online, other tenants have reported the same things. Footsteps, locked doors, a man in old-fashioned clothes. Whatever is in that house doesn't want people there. My girlfriend and I were taking a road trip through the desert in Nevada, and we decided to stop at an old ghost town we'd seen signs for. It was off the main highway, down a long dirt road. When we finally arrived, the place was completely abandoned. Just old wooden buildings slowly falling apart under the sun. We parked and started exploring, taking photos as we went. It was midday, and the heat was brutal, but the town itself was fascinating. We were checking out what used to be a saloon when we both heard it. Music. It was coming from one of the buildings farther down the street. It sounded like an old piano, playing a ragtime tune. We looked at each other, confused. The town was supposed to be abandoned. We walked toward the sound. It was coming from a building that looked like it had once been a hotel. The front door was hanging open now, and as we got closer, we could hear the piano clearly. We called out, asking if anyone was there. The music didn't stop. We went inside. The sound was coming from upstairs. We climbed the creaky staircase, and just as we reached the second floor, the music stopped abruptly. The hallway was dark and smelled like dust and decay. We checked every room. They were all empty. No piano, no people, no explanation for where the music had come from. As we were leaving, we heard footsteps behind us, heavy boots on the wooden floor. We turned around and saw a shadow at the end of the hallway, the shape of a man. Then we blinked, and it was gone. We didn't hesitate. We got out of that building as fast as we could and went straight back to our car. As we were driving away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. In one of the second-floor windows of the hotel, I saw someone standing there, watching us leave. A man dressed in old Western clothing, just standing perfectly still. When I looked again a few seconds later, he was gone. When we got home, we looked up the history of the town. We found out that the hotel had burned down in 1903, killing everyone inside, including a piano player who had been performing at the time. Other people have reported hearing piano music coming from the ruins. Some have seen figures in old-fashioned clothing. I've never been back. My wife and I bought an old farmhouse in rural Vermont. On our very first night there, we both woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of someone walking around downstairs. Heavy footsteps, moving from room to room. I grabbed a baseball bat, and we went downstairs together, turning on lights as we went. Every room was empty. The front and back doors were still locked. All the windows were closed. We went back to bed, telling ourselves maybe we'd imagined it. The next night, the same thing happened. Footsteps downstairs at exactly 2 a.m. This time, we also heard what sounded like drawers opening and closing. We called the police. They came out, searched the house and the property, and found nothing. They suggested it might be the house settling, or pipes making noise. But we knew what we'd heard. On the third night, we decided to stay awake and see what actually happened. Right at 2 a.m, the footsteps started again. We crept to the top of the stairs and looked down into the living room. There was a man down there. He was elderly, wearing overalls and a flannel shirt. He was walking around slowly, looking at our furniture, touching our things, and we could see right through him. He was translucent, like a reflection. We watched as he opened drawers, clearly searching for something. Then he looked up and saw us standing there. He stared at us for a moment. Then he spoke. His voice was faint, like it was coming from very far away. He said, "Where is she? Where's my wife?" And then he faded away, just disappeared. We stood there in shock, completely unable to move. The next day, we asked our neighbors about the previous owners of the house. They told us an elderly couple had lived there for more than 50 years. The husband had died suddenly from a heart attack, and his wife had moved into a nursing home shortly after. She passed away a few months before we bought the house. The neighbors also told us something else. The husband had a routine. Every night before bed, he'd walk through the house, checking the doors and the windows, making sure everything was secure. We think he's still doing that, still making his nightly rounds, still looking for his wife, still trying to protect the house. He appears about once a week now, always at 2 a.m, always following the same routine. We've gotten used to him. He doesn't seem to mean any harm. He just feels stuck, trapped in the pattern of his life, unable to move on.